All right, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Improving Your HealthCheck360 Score, Part 2. Before I get started, just a couple of the normal announcements. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, and you can type those into the question box in the lower portion of your webinar on our blog. The link for that will be shown at the end. And if you would like a PDF copy of the slides and presentation, there will be a link to download that on that same post as the recording. If your question does not get answered today, please email our support inbox, which will be shown at the end as well. So, like I said, this is part 2 of our 2-part series this month. If you haven't already watched part 1, please head to our blog after this webinar and take a look when you have a chance, as we covered nutrition and exercise on that one, how those affect your score, and some tips on getting started with some changes. This week, we've got stress and sleep for topics. So here's a quick reminder on what we test on our standard screening panel. I covered this in a little more detail in part 1, so I'm not going to spend the same amount of time today. As you can see, we measure BMI or body mass index, waist circumference, blood pressure, glucose or blood sugar, cholesterol, and nicotine. Again, this is our standard panel, so you may see differences in your company's choices. We also have a variety of liver and kidney tests on our standard screening, but those are not scored, so we're just going to focus on the biometrics listed above for today, with the exception of nicotine. If you would like to talk further on that topic, please reach out. Our contact info, again, will be shown at the end, as I mentioned. So, what can you do to help get those biometric numbers either moving in the right direction or keep them in a good range if they're already good by focusing on stress and sleep? Let's start like we did in part 1 with how these two areas of our health actually affect our biometrics. How does stress affect our BMI and our waistline? Some of you may be familiar with the hormone cortisol. For those of you who are not, you're going to hear it a lot today, but cortisol is released when we are in a stressed state, and it triggers our body to store fat and energy. That stress state is called fight or flight. You may have heard of that before. Our body is getting ready to face some sort of threat, so it wants to store as much energy as it can. Now, our threats are not the same as early humans. There's probably not going to be any woolly mammoths chasing us or big periods where we don't have enough food. Our body doesn't know that, though, so it releases that cortisol to try and help us. And unfortunately, many of us live in a state of chronic stress, and we are in that fight or flight mode due to things like careers, commuting, technology, lots and lots of chronic stressors that we get every day. So if our body is continuously releasing cortisol, it's continuously telling our body to store fat, right? And cortisol and other stress hormones add insult to injury by making us crave more of that quick energy, like sugar, in case we need to make a quick run for our lives. And then after that quick energy, you get that blood sugar drop because those foods don't provide long-term energy, right? Energy or sugar gives us a quick up and then we go low again. And then your body signals you to crave more food. And what's it signal you to crave? Sugar. Again, we don't need that quick energy with this type of stress we are facing. We don't run physically away from our stressors. Sometimes we may want to, but we don't. And our bodies store those extra sugars again and again and again, creating that vicious cycle of weight gain and increasing our measurements. So we need to get a handle on our stress response to stop that cycle, which we'll talk about in a bit as far as how to get started. But how about sleep? How does lack of adequate sleep and quality make us gain weight? Let's start with research. People that sleep less than 6 hours per night on average are more likely to have a higher weight. 7 to 9 hours is the typical recommendation. It's going to vary, but that's typical recommendation for adults. Sleep is now right up there with exercise and eating when it comes to risk factors for weight gain. Now, why is that? Well, when we sleep, our bodies secrete hormones to help us control our appetite, help energy metabolism, and the processing of that glucose or that blood sugar. When we don't get good sleep, these hormones get all messed up. Two of the main hormones when it comes to appetite are leptin and ghrelin. Leptin alerts our brain that it has enough food, and ghrelin stimulates our appetite, alerting our brain that we're hungry. Now, we release less leptin and more ghrelin when we don't have good sleep. That's the exact opposite of what we want, right? And then when ghrelin comes in abundance, it makes us crave that quick energy again, like those sugars, really the opposite of what we want. We also release more cortisol, which I've already mentioned as a stress hormone, which we know isn't good, right? Your metabolism function also goes down with lack of sleep, which means we just don't use up the energy from the foods we take in. If our body doesn't metabolize the foods we take in, we simply store it. Same thing as that cortisol, leading to weight gain. And lastly, it just simply lowers our motivation and our energy. Our judgment is worse, which leads to poor decisions, right? If we're tired, we don't want to exercise. We're worse at controlling our stress. We want to reach for those sugary foods, like I said, which is going to lead to that weight gain and those measurements going up. So there's the connection with stress and sleep and the BMI and the weight and the measurements. Move on to blood pressure. How does stress affect our blood pressure? This one is one that most of you probably know, that stress raises our blood pressure. A lot of times we can physically feel that happening, right? We're stressed, we feel our heart rate increase and get that uncomfortable sensation. Our body also releases adrenaline and cortisol, which affect the blood pressure by making the heart beat faster, and it also constricts our blood vessels in order to get more blood to the core of our body, which it does in anticipation for kind of that fight or flight again, some sort of physical exertion. Now, this is just a temporary response, and for most of us, once that stressor is gone, our blood pressure returns to normal. But again, because some of us are in an almost constant state of stress, that blood pressure can start to stay elevated even when you don't feel stressed, giving us higher readings and some major risks for heart attacks and heart disease. How about sleep and blood pressure? Well, it's thought that sleep helps your body regulate those stress hormones that we've already talked about. And those hormones help regulate blood pressure as well, right? So there's that connection. Now, if you have sleep apnea, or obstructive sleep apnea is the full term, that's a disorder in which you repeatedly stop and start breathing during the night. This is a major risk factor for increasing blood pressure and other heart problems. So that specific condition is a major relationship with sleep and blood pressure. A study last year, specifically in women, showed that sleep disturbances, so again, not necessarily the lack of the amount of sleep, but when you get woken up and that sleep quality goes down, can increase risk of high blood pressure. Again, that was just in women, that study was, but it's definitely something to pay attention to. And then you have the indirect relationship. If you don't sleep well, you're not going to handle those stressors well. We've been through this already. You're not eating as well. Those poor decisions due to lack of sleep or lack of quality can still affect your blood pressure, and again, really all of your numbers in that roundabout way. How about stress and glucose? I pretty much covered it with that BMI in the waist when we chatted about that, but I'll reiterate. When that cortisol is released, there's that hormone again. I hope you're realizing it's a pretty big deal, but it causes us to crave those sugary foods, leading to short-term increase in glucose or blood sugar. But if we don't turn that cortisol off, that cycle again, that keeps going. And when we store that extra fat that is created by storing sugars, we typically store it in our abdomen, which leads to greater risk of insulin resistance, which can lead to type 2 diabetes, which is what glucose is. That's why we measure glucose, is for type 2 diabetes risk. How about sleep and glucose? Again, this is similar to what we've already talked about, but let's discuss it again. We have the poor decision making when we're tired, partially due to what we already discussed. When we don't sleep enough, that leptin, which signals us that we are full, is lowered, and the ghrelin, which signals us that we are hungry, is increased. So again, we enter that cycle of craving bad foods, creating excess sugars in our body, which makes it harder for the body to get rid of, causing a higher risk of elevated glucose and eventually sometimes type 2 diabetes. A study on the National Sleep Foundation's website looked at people that weren't entering that deepest sleep at night and found that their insulin sensitivity and glucose tolerance went down by 25%. That's a very significant number. So again, it's not about the quality of sleep, it's about the quality. But for our purposes today, getting yourself to bed to give yourself a chance at that sleep is the first step that a lot of us need to take. So that's what we're going to cover today when we get to those tips. And then last area, cholesterol. How does stress affect cholesterol? Now, a 2017 study found that psychological stress led to higher levels of triglycerides and LDL cholesterol and lower levels of HDL. That's not what we want, right? Because the HDL is the good stuff. That's the stuff we want higher. They believe that a couple of things could be at play here. One is called hemoconcentration. This causes the blood to lose fluid and can be caused by stress. The components of our blood become more concentrated, including the cholesterol, which can cause a temporary higher cholesterol reading. And again, if you're stressed on a consistent basis, those numbers are going to start to stay elevated. And here we go again, the cortisol. This makes sense again though, right? Because cortisol increases our cravings for unhealthy foods, which in turn affect our cholesterol. And then there's also some talk that because stress can harm our immune system, it can lead to inflammation in our bodies, which could affect cholesterol levels, because a lot of times that LDL cholesterol is in response to some sort of inflammation in our bodies. And of course, our other lifestyle habits when we're stressed aren't the best. We know this already, but we know that that can affect things in an indirect way. And then lastly, sleep and cholesterol. We've already covered the indirect ways with the bad habits when we don't get enough sleep, so you understand that. A study that was just published this month actually linked irregular sleep patterns, so again, not just the amount, but sleep schedules and going to bed at different times with cholesterol issues. So I just threw a lot of information at you, and you hopefully at least remember that sleep and stress do affect us a lot and that cortisol does something bad, right? But let's get to some actions that you can take now to prevent some of what I just mentioned. Let's start with that stress. I'm going to split this up into two parts. What you can do for in-the-moment stress and what you can do to create long-term stress management to hopefully prevent a lot of that stress response from happening in the first place when you do encounter stress. Okay, picture this. You're in a car, you're stuck in traffic, you're already running late. Classic stress situation, right? What can you do to help calm or stop that physical response in that moment? First, breathe. And I don't mean big huffy breaths because you're mad. I mean slow, calming breaths. There are a few different breathing techniques out there, but here's a simple one to remember. It's called box breathing. This is also known as four-square breathing, tactical breathing, and combat breathing because it actually comes from the military, hence those names. But anyways, here's what you do. Now, feel free to try this along with me. You're going to inhale for a slow count of 4. Once you get to that 4, you're going to hold your breath. Hold that inhale for a count of 4. And then after you hold that count, exhale for a slowly count of 4. And then you're going to hold that exhale for a count of 4. Get it box breathing. 4, 4, 4, 4. Now, you can do this as much or as little as necessary. If you want to do it once or twice, or you can do it for a few minutes. What this does is it forces your body to slow down, and it forces your mind to focus on that counting, ideally rather than that stressor that you're facing, right? Another way to help that immediate stress is to focus on your senses. So, sight. If you're still in your car, look for something pleasant, while being safe, of course, not to take your eyes off the road for too long. But if you're stuck in traffic, you're probably stopped anyways, right? But it could be a cloud in the sky, a bird, a tree, a funny bumper sticker on someone else's car. Focus on something pleasant. Sound. Have your favorite radio station saved, or have your playlist going in your iTunes so you can focus on that music that makes you feel good. Smell. This one's a little harder in the car, but if you have a good smelling car deodorizer, smell that, or if you have, good shampoo, you can smell your hair, something like that. Touch. Feel your smooth steering wheel, your soft socks on your feet, something like that. Taste. Have some tasty mints in your console that you can grab. If you physically can't do some of these, which I understand depending on the situation, you can still get that good sense just by thinking of your favorites. It's still going to be effective. Just, again, it's the distraction, but it's also thinking of those positive, pleasant things when you're in that not so pleasant situation. There are actually techniques out there for those that have anxiety concerns that use senses as a grounding method. It's just a way to remind you of being in the present and bring you back from those worries that you can have. So in that situation that some people use for anxiety, you simply list 5 things that you see, 4 things that you feel, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and 1 thing that you taste. Again, give it a try. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how effective either of these techniques are at calming your mind when you're in that moment. And like I said, the car is limited, but think of all the different situations you can use this for. We're more stressed in other areas too. And you've got all these other options you would have depending on where you go. You can get up and go for a walk to see and hear nature. You can stretch and feel those muscles relax and stretch, you can go pet your dog or your cat or whatever you may have. Anything that's going to trigger that calm is something to think about with those senses. Okay, one more tip for the in-the-moment stress: positive self-talk or reframing. If you're in a traffic jam, you can focus on the negatives of the situation. And a lot of times that's what we do, right? Our brain is trained to focus on negatives. It's not our fault, but we can practice so that we can change that. Because you're not going to change the situation, right? You can't change it just by thinking negatively. So start to think of the positives of being stuck in traffic with nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. Hey, you're in a traffic jam because you're going to a job, because you have a job, right? That's a positive. You get more time to listen to your favorite songs or that podcast or ebook you just downloaded that you listen on your commute. You have more time to practice those breathing techniques that I just showed you. If you have a hands-free phone, you can call a family member or friend, have a chat. Every situation has a positive. We just have to take time to find it. Also, have some perspective. Is traffic backed up because someone got hurt in an accident? Be grateful that that's not you or a loved one, right? I will touch on adapting your response to stressors more in a minute, and we'll talk a little bit more about reframing the situation. But that's something that's really, really good, but it takes practice like everything else. But it's really something I want you to try. Okay, so you have some options for that right now stress. How can you plan ahead to hopefully deal with long-term stress and also to help prevent some of that stress response in the first place? First, I want you to track your stress in a stress journal. If you watched part 1, you heard us talking about tracking nutrition, tracking exercise. Same thing goes with stress. If you don't know what exactly is stressing you out, how can you make plans to help? Now, this can be a physical journal, or you can use an app. There's lots of apps out there. We actually have a journal section on the HealthCheck app. That's a nice place to keep things in one spot so you can reflect. And we do this because some stressors are obvious, like that traffic. You know that stresses you out, but some are not so obvious. So keep track of the following things. What caused your stress? Make your best guess if you're 100% sure or not 100% sure. And again, that's why you have the journal, so you can fill it out at that time when you're stressed. How did you feel, physically and emotionally? How did you respond? What did you do to make yourself feel better? Was it a positive or was it a negative? Paying attention to these factors will help you map your current habits and find areas to improve. Once you know your stressors, the next step is to use the 4 A's. This is a fantastic resource I got from helpguide.org. First, of your stressors, are there any that you can avoid? Now, this could be limiting time spent with certain individuals, saying no to requests that are not a must-do so that your commitments don't become overwhelming. This is a hard one for some people. You know who you are, but it's also a very important one. If you get stressed out by the news, take a break from it. If it would help to take a longer but less traffic-heavy route to work, do it. Avoid that stress in the first place. See what you can control and make those changes that you can. Again, we know we're not going to change everything, but some things we can change. Next A is alter. If you can't avoid something, you need to change how you approach or operate in that situation. First, you need to communicate. If you're mad at your spouse or significant other because they're not pulling their weight at home, you have to tell them. Yes, this is hard, but being open now can prevent a lot of future stress from coming. You have to alter your approach in that situation to help future stress. And then after you communicate, be willing to compromise too. Be open to find a middle ground with things. It may not be perfect, but it can be better, lowering that overall stress. Alter your schedule and create time for the different areas of your life: work, family, friends, and yourself. Planning ahead for me time is one of the best stress relievers there is. On that note, time management in general is a great way to avoid stress. So really keep that in mind. We may do a webinar next year on time management because that's a really important factor in preventing stress. So keep that in mind when you're planning your week out as well. Next A is adapt. This is where that reframing comes back in. Positive self-talk reframing the situation and finding the positive, finding perspective, practicing gratitude. These are all phenomenal ways to deal with stressors that we can't change. Look at the big picture. Is this going to be important in a day, a week, a month, or a year? If not, is it worth stressing about right now? And then don't expect things to always go perfectly. We stress so much at situations that we visualized going this one way, this perfect way, but that didn't happen in reality. So you need to set realistic expectations for things and continue to focus on all the positives that happen, and I promise you will see a big increase in happiness. That's what we do. If we focus on that positive, be grateful, have that perspective, you're going to naturally see more of that positive. When we look for things, we typically see them. So let's look for the positive rather than the negative, and it's going to change your outlook. And then last A, accept. You can't control everything that happens no matter how much you want to, right? If you have stress, take a second, acknowledge it. It's there. You have that stress. It's going to happen. But don't dwell on it. Focus again on what you can control, which is how you react. Look for those positives. Forgive is a big thing. This is another one that can be really hard, but can be really important. When you accept that stress and you can forgive, depending on what the situation is, it's really important for us to move on from that stress. When you hold a grudge, who does that hurt? It doesn't hurt the person that you're mad at because they don't feel that stress response. You're only hurting yourself with that stress. And then on that note, get your feelings out. Talk to someone, family, friends, your pet, a professional if needed. Get those feelings out, and that can relieve that stress that you need to accept. Accept that situation so that stress can go away. Now, I want you to take some time and create a stress toolbox for yourself based on what we've talked about. Now, all I mean by this is to stop and think about your favorite activities or calming things and just make sure you've got them incorporated into your daily life and can have kind of a reminder like, oh, yes, I can go do that if I'm feeling a little stressed. It can be exercise, eating well, meditation, music, that gratitude journal that we talked about, having your go-to list of people or pets to talk to. And then here's a key. Use these even when you aren't stressed. If you get into the habit of doing things that make you happy and calm, even when you're not stressed, your body is going to be better able to deal with stress that we know is coming, that we can't always avoid. Again, we can't avoid all stress, but we can change our response to it. Coach Kirsty is actually going to be doing next month's webinar on resilience, and she will cover some great ways to stay positive and bounce back from stressful situations. So be sure you tune in for that one as well to learn more on that topic. Okay, let's finish up with sleep. What are some things that you can start to do today to help your sleep? First, stick to a schedule. If you go to bed and get up at the same time every day, your body is able to create its sleep-wake or wake-sleep schedule, and then those hormones that we talked about and all of your body's processes are better able to be regulated. Now, I know this is impossible with some of you. You have shifting schedules, you have other factors that make it so you can't physically go to bed and wake up at the same time. I totally understand that. So if you can't go to bed at the same time, then you can create a similar routine that you can do before bed, no matter what time it is, to help calm your body and your mind. This could be taking a bath, it could be reading, could be meditation, anything that you can do to start that winding down process physically and mentally. Another tip is to avoid naps. Don't get mad. I know naps are the best, and sometimes, again, naps can be valuable in some situations, especially if you do have a shifting schedule. I'm not saying that everyone should avoid naps, but if you're able to go to bed at the same time each night but are having a hard time falling asleep, if you're a napper, then avoiding those naps can help your body start to create, again, that good sleep-wake schedule like I talked about. It might be hard right away, but if you can make it to bed, make it to your bedtime, your body's going to be that much more ready to go to sleep. All right. Next tip, exercise. Regular exercise helps your body expend energy, reduces stress, and can help reset that sleep-wake schedule. And if you can get outside to exercise, even better, because you absorb that natural sunlight that triggers your body to be awake during the day. And then when your temperature goes back down after you exercise, it can actually trigger that sleepiness too. So there's lots of good things with exercise. But keep in mind that you need to figure out the best time to exercise for you, because it's not the same for everyone. Some people can exercise right before bed and be fine and go right to bed. Some people need to space it out and as it gives them more energy. So you have to kind of figure it out, do some experimenting to see what time of day works best for you. Let's talk nutrition to end here, one of the last things to end here. What you eat can absolutely affect how you sleep, right? We've all felt that. So practice good overall eating habits. Take a look at part 1 for some tips to get started, but a couple specific suggestions for sleep. You want to avoid alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, and large meals as much as you can, especially in the afternoon and evening. If you do need a snack later in the evening, that's okay. Just make sure it's lighter and make sure it's lower in sugar, because that's going to give us that spike. It's going to give us that energy, right? Things like almonds, walnuts, chamomile tea, kiwi, cherries, among other things, are thought to help sleep, many of which haven't been studied too much. So it's going to be a bit about, again, trying different things, keep track of how they work for you. Sleep journal is always a good option as well, just like every other journaling. But don't drink too much liquid or you'll have to get up for a bathroom break. So make sure you keep that in mind. And then sleep environment. There are lots of factors at play when it comes to what you should pay attention to when it comes to your sleep. The National Sleep Foundation has a ton of great information, so head to that website. But I've broken it down into some things to start with. First, temperature. Ideal bedroom temperature is between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit, so try to make that happen if you can. Noise. Ideally, you won't have any excess noise outside noise. Now, if this is an issue, if you're on a busy street or if you have to sleep during the day, white noise machines or fans do wonders to help dampen those big noises that can wake you up. And again, if you sleep during the day when traffic is more and people are more, that can help dampen that and wake you up less. If you have a partner who snores, earplugs or the guest bedroom would maybe help, wink, wink. Light. Pitch black is the best way to sleep, but as little light as possible is the goal. Blackout curtains can be found online or at a lot of local home stores. Eye masks as well. That, again, especially if you work at night and have to try to sleep during the day and you don't necessarily have a super dark room, those are great options too. And then technology. Try and stop using technology as far ahead of bedtime as possible. Ideally an hour. I get that that's not always possible, but as far as ahead as you can. That's, again, going to let your body and mind wind down, as these lights can mess with our body's production of melatonin, which is a hormone that helps us sleep. And if you haven't gotten a new mattress or pillows in a while, it might be time for an upgrade. I know this can be a big investment, but good quality beds and pillows is well worth it when you consider how much sleep affects your overall health and how much time you spend sleeping, right? I mean, it's a big part of our day, so that investment goes a long way. And if you can't get to sleep at night, don't toss and turn in bed. Get up, go to another room that's nice and dark still, and do a calm activity. Turn on a little light. You can read until you feel tired enough to go back to bed. Don't turn on the TV, because that's going to, again, mess up with your melatonin there. And ideally, you wouldn't even have a TV or computer in your room. So don't associate, because we don't want to associate our bed with anything other than sleep. And that's what happens when we have TVs and other activities in there. And if you try all these tips and you're still having trouble, maybe time to chat with your doctor, right? There are a lot of factors that can affect sleep, so talking with a professional can help get to the bottom of any medical issues that may be at play. All right, let's end with a whole bunch of motivation, shall we? Take some time in the near future, decide where you want to be, take the first step. You can improve not only your HealthCheck360 score, but more importantly, improve your life. You guys got this. All right, upcoming webinars, and then I'll stay late for some questions here. Next month, as I already mentioned, developing resilience. Coach Kersey is going to talk about practicing optimism and healthy habits to adapt to all those curveballs that life likes to throw at us. And then in August, processed food. Most food is processed, so we'll talk about better, worse, good, all those different varieties when we talk about better choices that you can be making when it comes to processed food. And then here's our contact information. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, our blog. That's where you're going to get this recording and the webinar slides if you want to download those. And then watch any of our past webinars, like I said, part 1. And then you can give us a call or shoot us an email. We can set up a time to chat. We would love to take some time to talk with you. Other than that,